The United States may not have bought Greenland despite threats from its president, but America is closer than ever to controlling large parts of the island nation. Well, you heard that right. Donald Trump has not given up on his Greenland dream. He has simply changed his strategy. On Wednesday, the American president declared that after talks with NATO chief Mark Rutte, he has struck a deal on the future of Greenland, agreeing to what he calls a future framework for the island. He told reporters at Davos that the deal gives the United States everything that it's wanted so far. And on his social media platform, he declared, and I quote, "Everyone agrees the United States is the most powerful country anywhere on the globe," unquote. While the details of this deal remain limited, reports suggest that the new agreement allows the U.S. to exercise sovereign control over selected military zones in Greenland. These areas would effectively become American territory, similar to British bases in Cyprus, allowing Washington to operate independently. And in return, Trump has dropped his threat to impose new trade tariffs on the European allies of America, who had refused to fall behind him in his plans to take over Greenland. Just hours before announcing the deal, Donald Trump had demanded the right to buy Greenland from Denmark. Then at the World Economic Forum at Davos, he claimed that Europe owed the island to the United States for America's role in the World War II. But European allies pushed back against Trump's claims. Denmark rejected any proposal to sell its territory. Greenland's local government also made it clear that it was not for sale. And so the result was a compromise. Trump is not buying Greenland. He's not taking over the whole of the island. Instead, this new deal allows the United States to control parts of Greenland, mainly the military bases and the strategic zones there. These areas would function like American territory. U.S. forces can operate there, build infrastructure, and run security missions. Essentially, in simple terms, Greenland remains Danish territory, but some key locations will be under U.S. control. It's like dividing the island into different zones. Denmark governs most of it, while America controls the most sensitive military areas. Trump says this is needed to stop Russia and China from expanding in the Arctic. Supporters say it strengthens Western security, but critics say that it weakens Greenland's sovereignty. So this is not annexation, but a sort of strategic partition of Greenland. Why is Greenland so important? Well, there are three major reasons. The first one is, of course, the geography. Greenland sits between North America and Europe, directly along key missile and aircraft routes. In any future conflict involving Russia or China, the Arctic could become a major battleground. The second one is resources. The island holds vast reserves of rare earth minerals, crucial for electronics, weapon systems, as well as clean energy technologies. China, remember, has been expanding its presence in Arctic mining and infrastructure. The U.S. wants to prevent that. And the third reason is missile defense. Remember, Trump has been pushing his Golden Dome project, a missile shield that would use Greenland as a forward base against potential Russian attacks. In short, whoever controls Greenland controls access to the Arctic. NATO officials say that this deal is aimed at preventing Russia and China from gaining influence in the region. But let's be serious. This is about America and its rivals. Russia has been increasing military activity in the high north in recent years. And China, though not an Arctic nation, calls itself a near-Arctic state and has invested heavily in this region. For the U.S., this deal is part of a wider strategy to reassert dominance in the Western alliance. But it has also raised concerns. Some European governments fear that the U.S. is acting unilaterally, sidelining its allies and undermining shared decision-making. France has already indicated that it will not support the arrangement. Britain and Norway have expressed unease as well. Trump's threats and rhetoric continue to keep Europe on an edge. At Davos, Trump warned that the U.S. would remember if Denmark refused his demands. In fact, he also called Greenland a big, beautiful piece of ice and suggested that only America could defend it. For anyone paying attention, this is Trump's way of keeping political pressure on a smaller ally. What do Greenlanders have to say? Take a listen.
negotiate, like, if he wants some minerals, he can have negotiations with Greenlanders if he wants some, but not. We cannot be owned.
I thought that America was our friend. I thought they were our friends. Maybe it's Trump. They were our friends for a long time. We got to know them. They visited Kangalussuaq. They are in Pituffik Air Base. We depend on them. But since they decided to do that, threatened to take control of Greenland, they suddenly seem scary.
So what happens next? Well, for now, the agreement remains a framework. It is not finalized treaty. Formal negotiations between the US, Denmark, Greenland and NATO partners are all expected in the coming weeks. And key questions remain unanswered. Which bases will fall under US control? How much authority will Denmark retain? Will Greenland's local population have any say at all? And how will Russia and China respond? European leaders are holding an emergency summit to coordinate their position. NATO has paused its plans for a separate Arctic mission to avoid escalating tensions. We, of course, will continue to track developments very closely for you. Dawn breaks over Gaza with the sound of strikes that killed 11 Palestinians, among them 2 children and 3 journalists, as Israeli attacks ripped through the enclave. 6 more lie wounded. Cameras are shattered, voices are silenced. These sporadic attacks on scribes created a massive outrage within the fraternity. Media watchdogs have expressed deep anger and claims that the region is by far the deadliest place for journalists across the world.
We're horrified and appalled by the killing of 3 journalists today in Gaza. This is the latest in a pattern of targeted attacks on journalists that we've seen by Israel on Palestinian journalists. We've called out and condemned this continued targeting of Palestinian journalists, which is unfortunately part of a broader pattern we've seen by Israel in an attempt to censor and control information coming out of Gaza.
The journalists were using a drone to take images of aid distribution by the Egyptian Relief Committee in the Gaza Strip when a strike targeted a vehicle accompanying them. Israel says that they carried out the attack on suspicion of drone usage.
Everyone knows that the Egyptian Committee's work in the Gaza Strip is humanitarian and relief-oriented, providing aid to our people under complicated security conditions. However, we were surprised today, and we wonder why Israeli aircraft targeted this jeep belonging to the Egyptian Committee.
Palestinians gathered to mourn the death of the journalists who were killed in latest strikes. Nearly 220 journalists, remember, have been killed by Israel since Hamas's attack in October 2023 that sparked the war in Gaza. The war front expands to the north as well. Israeli warplanes and drone strikes deep into southern Lebanon, hitting the towns of Kanarit, Bazourie and Zahrani. 2 have been killed. At least 19 people have been wounded when drones target cars on open roads. Israel says the targets belong to Hezbollah. Weapons depot, infrastructure and hidden assets all are targeted. Israel justified their actions. It says that evacuation warnings were issued first and that bombs were dropped later. The attacks were carried out because Lebanon failed to disarm militant groups. In fact, that is what Israel has been saying. But back in Gaza, the damage goes beyond the dead. The UN warns that the city's lifeline is failing. Nearly 70% of Gaza City's water supply is disrupted. Pipelines are broken, repairs are stalled. A single section of steel pipe, which is labeled as dual use, is blocked from entry. Winter cold sets in. Clean water runs out. Civilians pay the price.
On water, sanitation, and hygiene, warned that approximately 70% of Gaza City's total water production is currently disrupted due to challenges related to repairing the Mekorot water supply line. The line comes from Israel into Gaza and is located east of the so-called Yellow Line, where Israeli forces remain deployed. An assessment of the pipeline identified the need for a section of steel pipe that is not available in Gaza and is restricted from entry into Gaza as a dual-use item.
The timing of these attacks is ironical. Just moments before these strikes, Israeli Prime Minister had accepted an invitation from President Donald Trump to join what is called the Board of Peace, a region kept on the edge since 2023 by Netanyahu, who is facing trial for being a war criminal. He will be part of the body that is meant to champion peace in the region. Since October 10th, a fragile US-sponsored ceasefire in Gaza has largely halted the fighting between Israeli forces and Hamas. But both sides have alleged frequent violations and kept the region on an edge. It is a bitter winter on the Ukrainian battlefront as strikes continue across the south of Russia. A Ukrainian drone strike has set oil terminal tanks on fire at the Volna Russian authorities, claiming 3 dead and 8 injured. Russia, on the other hand, continues to pummel Ukraine after their recent drone attacks, which took out Ukraine's major energy infrastructure and bringing life to stand still. Russian forces carried out fresh drone strikes in Dnipro, which injured 7 people in a residential building and continues to make the citizens vulnerable.
This is a horrible event. I feel very sorry. I hope that there were simply no people there. I hope they were at work. The apartment can be rebuilt, but people are irreplaceable. I checked the group chat of neighbours, Eddie, and saw that there was no power at home. I decided not to go home. I would just leave the car and go to work. And then I saw a flash. I realised that I didn't need to go anywhere, but thank God everyone is alive and well.
Now, amid this winter escalation, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky met on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum, with Donald Trump declaring that a peace deal to end the war is getting close.
What do you mean by total? We're meeting with Russia. That'll take place tomorrow. We're going to be meeting with President Putin. Had a very good meeting with President Zelensky. Everybody wants to have the war end.
Zelensky also lauded this meeting with Donald Trump as productive and substantive. In fact, he went on to accuse Europe of avoiding action on Ukraine after meeting with Trump in Davos.
Today we met with President Trump and our teams are working almost every day. It's not simple. The documents aimed at ending this war are nearly ready, and that really matters. Europe loves to discuss the future, but avoids taking action today, action that defines what kind of future we will have. That is the problem. Why can't President Trump stop tankers from the shadow fleet and seize oil, but Europe doesn't?
Zelensky also said that a 2-day trilateral meeting between US, Russia and Ukraine will take place in the UAE over this weekend. Steve Witkoff is due to meet Russia's Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin later before flying to Moscow. Witkoff told reporters that it got down to one issue and that both parties have discussed iterations of that issue is solvable. Witkoff gave no details about the remaining sticking point, but recent talks have focused on the future status of Ukraine's industrial heartland in Donbas, with a proposal for a demilitarized and free economic zone in exchange for security guarantees for Kiev. Now, there has been concern in Kiev that Trump's spat with his European NATO allies over the future of Greenland has deflected him from the war in Ukraine. Previously, remember, after talks in Miami, Zelensky had said that a 20-point U.S. plan to end the war was 90% ready and that Ukraine's position on Donbas in eastern Ukraine was different to that of Russia's. The other big sticking point that Zelensky highlighted last month was future control of Ukraine's enormous Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which was seized by Russia in March 2022.